Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you, Marie-Thérèse, and I'm very happy to be with you today. It's always good to come back among friends. So it's really a pleasure to be around here to share the discussion that you're going to have in these 2 days. And I'd like to thank the organizers, of course, the Ministerkonferenz and the other organizers for inviting me. I would like to speak a little bit about what we really care about, which is the future of the World Heritage Convention. It's something that, of course, will have its full discussion in a few weeks when we meet in Bonn. But I think it's very appropriate that we have these 2 days of discussion here in Germany just before. Because many issues that we are going to discuss today will come back, during the works of the committee and during the workshops that have been organized around the committee. I'm very happy to see that this year we will have even 2 workshops, one of the NGOs and one organized by you, Marie-Thérèse, and during the committee. I think it's very important that the committee is not just the committee meet is not just a gathering of intergovernmental officials, but on the contrary, something that brings together completely the community that works around World Heritage. Now, I would like to start my presentation with some considerations that were already made just now by Madame Gretzky and the others that spoke before me on an issue that we have, a really very serious issue that we have in front of us. We speak about the 5 Cs, but when we made the 5 Cs in the past decade, we forgot that there is another C, a bad C, that is really now on the forefront, as the bad C is the conflicts. That's something that we have, in front of us every day, and heritage, and World Heritage in particular, has been the object of much distraction. In recent times, we have seen, just think of the past 2 years, how much and how fragile heritage is, even when it is protected by international tools, such as the World Heritage Convention. As we speak, a very important site, Palmyra, certainly is under threat. We don't know today if it will survive the destructive fury of the Islamic State that has already proven its capacity to destroy heritage, like in Nineveh, Ashur, or Nimrod in other Iraqi sites. So we are somehow suspended. Now, we don't know whether there will be Palmyra in the future, this great site that represents a high moment of human civilization. Unfortunately, we cannot say, and this is a very sad consideration, we cannot say that the World Heritage Convention has been able to protect these sites. Has not been able to protect the sites that are being threatened by conflict. The World Heritage List is very important when we deal with the promotion of a site, its conservation. Of course, it mobilizes resources, mobilizes public attention. But when we have a big problem, no, it's okay. When we have a big problem like we had in Mali a year ago or 2 years ago, Yemen, Sana'a is another site at risk, or the ones I just mentioned, then the World Heritage Convention shows its limits. And I think we should really use this opportunity to prompt reflection on this role and these limits. This is certainly the foremost international tool for heritage protection, something that we know commands international respect. But we see that it has very big limits in respect to these conflicts. Sometimes even plays a role of attraction. I remember when we had the discussion internally on a case of Mali, for instance, and we made appeals at UNESCO for the safeguarding of Mali. This appeal was used by the Salafist forces to accelerate their destruction. In fact, we even played a role of attraction. We attracted the distraction of those who want to spread terror in the communities that are in the areas around attack and spread terror in the rest of the world. So we have some concern, and I know that it's very difficult to find solutions, but we have to put this up front. Now, of course, it's not the role of the World Heritage Convention to prevent the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. It's something that perhaps belongs to other bodies and other tools. As you know, we have at least 2 conventions that try to focus on this issue. One is the 1954 Convention for the Protection of Cultural Heritage in case of armed conflict, and the other one is the 1970 Convention for the fight against the illicit traffic of cultural heritage. Recently, we had also a new tool that came to play. I think it's an important thing to mark. The International Criminal Court has started playing a role, as it opened a prosecution for the destruction of the mausoleums in Timbuktu. As you know, the International Criminal Court depends from a treaty called the Treaty of Rome, which is, of course, not ratified by all the countries. Some of the big countries like China or US have not signed it, but still there are a lot of countries, 120 plus, and they have, in fact, one article of the treaty that deals with the destruction of heritage or the attack to heritage. So I think it's important to notice these 2. But the other 2 are, in fact, the 2 main long-term Convention for the Protection of Cultural Heritage in case of armed conflict has 60 years. Unfortunately, it's very hard to say that these tools have really been able to be useful in this respect. They are, of course, very useful in raising the attention of the international community. They're very useful in training people and forces, such as, for instance, the customs or even the military and so on. But very seldom they have been able to prevent destruction. I think it's something that shows the limits of the tools that the international community, even with the clearest intention of protecting heritage, we remain with very limited operational capacities. There are now discussions, as you know, at UNESCO and also beyond UNESCO to create special forces. They call it the Blue Helmet for Culture. Special forces that will accompany the military when there is an operation in a territory in order to protect and prevent destruction of heritage. But these things are very difficult to do. They're very difficult to even to approve, because as you know, there are a lot of resistances in the high bodies of the United Nations in developing these activities. So we will see whether these initiatives, which have been supported by UNESCO, will come to any say utility in the future. But it remains, and I think this is the message that I would like to leave here and perhaps discuss in the coming days, that the principles that we have established through the World Heritage Convention internationally in its more than 40 years of operation prove very, very fragile in front of a new wave of political disorders and conflicts that are dominated by non-state actors that want to defy and violate deliberately the international law and use its tools for a new and a really atrocious form of propaganda. It's true that we have not, it's not the first time this has happened. We have seen it 20 years ago. You might remember at the time of the Balkan Wars in the 1990s, or the destruction of the Mostar Bridge, for instance, or even the bombing of Dubrovnik, a World Heritage Site at that time. But the process seems to accelerate, and somehow the response is very limited by is limited and constrained by the intergovernmental political and diplomatic game of the process. Just this week, for instance, I don't know if you noticed that the UN Security Council has issued an appeal for the protection of the Iraqi heritage, but not for the Syrian heritage. Something that was really shocking for me, because it clearly shows that even heritage discussion, and when they go at that level, are completely politicized. Then they don't look at what we look at. We look at the heritage protection as an overarching goal. For them, for the governments that approve this in the Security Council, the thing is completely political. It's not a simple thing to accept. We receive every day from many parts of the world, from professionals, even from people, thousands of emails and even the local people, and everybody asks for help. Do something. And we're not able to help. This is very frustrating. This is, I think, a major issue that we cannot forget. I hope that the committee will address it and discuss it, knowing the limits of our own system, but at least putting it really up front will allow people to recognize that they are not ignored, and that we are sharing the concern for the conservation of their heritage, of their culture, of course, of these civilizations. Now, there is no quick solution. This is obvious, but let's at least try to strengthen the defensive, the preventive measures for the protection of heritage. We don't do enough, I think, even in the World Heritage System, to address this issue. The prevention of conflict, damages of conflict to World Heritage. There has been, in the past, some connection between the World Heritage Convention and the people of the 1954 Convention. I remember because I promoted it when I was at UNESCO, and this is a good step, but I can assure you that it is really far away from any satisfactory level of operation. And also convention, like the World Heritage Convention, is very, very often a bit jealous of its own autonomy, sovereignty, and so on. So they see more the political implication of dealing with another convention, which has another set of state parties ratifying, and some big parties are not there, and so on. So this creates immediately a blockage in the discussion. But unless we do more in prevention, then we will have other problems in the future. I think that prevention of damages for conflict should be an integral part of the management process. Something that requires the strengthening of conservation practices. And of course, the operational budgets. We have to face this. At the same time, all this is really important. It's a pillar of the first C, the credibility. I mean, if the convention cannot protect its sites, you can imagine how its credibility is damaged. It's something we have seen. We have seen and we receive messages from archaeologists, people that work on archaeological missions and so on, and essentially they say you're not credible because you cannot do anything in terms of saving the sites that you have so pompously put in the World Heritage List. So I hope in this symposium we will discuss this. And I think it's a very good idea that you had to put the 5 Cs at the core of your discussion, because they are the strategic platform. I personally think that the 5 Cs have to evolve all the time. In fact, there were 4 at the beginning, and then they became 5. I think we have to evolve, and perhaps by putting this issue of credibility at the forefront in the coming World Heritage Committee, something will change. I indicated some areas where I think the changes can be done in order to make it more, stronger, as a platform for the future of the convention. If an issue for the credibility is linked to conflicts, I don't think it's the only one issue. In recent years, the Convention and its credibility has been challenged on many other grounds, and we need to be aware that the situation that we have today, it's very far from ideal. I know the Convention is very much taken always by, the media and the glamorous part of its, and it's, looks all fantastic, but it is not. Also, the process that we use to manage the Convention is very far from ideal. And of course, you will all be in Bonn at the committee, and you realize that that very body has accumulated some issues that need to be addressed. There is the issue, of course, linked to the so-called politicization of the decisions. Don't want to go into any detail on this because there has been many discussions, but we have to acknowledge that there is a gap between that has increased between the technical life of the Convention and the political life of the Convention. We look at the number of times that the proposals or the issued by the advisory bodies have not been accepted or even reversed. And it shows. You could just look at the statistics in the past 5 years, just to take a period, you'll see that there is a exponential growth of the number of times this gap has appeared. Of course, the committee is a sovereign body, and we respect that. It's an independent intergovernmental body. They're not bound to these decisions. And they can have different views. This has always been in the history of the Convention, different views on a nomination, on a state of conservation, or anything. The committee is the decision-making body. I'm not saying that they have to follow. But at the same time, what's happening is that when a decision is changed, you may have noticed yourself, the reasons that are brought forward do not use the same depth of analysis and assessment that have been used by the advisory bodies. There is a big gap. The advisory body spends a lot of time, send missions a year, discussing in panels and so on. And what you find in the committee is very superficial in terms of discussion. Very often it's more like the use of a jargon. The committee has learned how to use the technical jargon, but it doesn't use the same, the same depth that is needed to assess a site or inscribe a site. I find that this is very, very tricky and very difficult to address because, of course, formally everything is fine, but it's not good. It's not good. So we have, if you want to remain credible, and by the way, as you know, the committee is now on streaming, so everybody can see it. We have to find a process that allows the committee, of course, to have its differences, cannot agree and disagreement with the proposals of the advisory bodies, but at the same time maintain the level of analysis and the level of assessment that is needed for something so serious as the description of a site or the assessment of a state of conservation. I don't have solutions, but perhaps new processes can be proposed, something that might involve supplementary assessments. This has been tried maybe in the past years 1 or 2 times. What's not good is to have a group of member states agreeing on a nomination or on a decision, and then somebody using the language of the convention to present what I call a mimicry of the process. I think the process should be very, very serious. It should be serious, and to be serious, it needs time, and it's professional mobilization, professional skills. It cannot be improvised as it is at the moment, and very often. I think this is, as far as I can go in the critique of the process, but certainly it is something that it will come back, and because the committee is in Germany, you may have also some role in this discussion. Now, there is a big link between also the issue of credibility and another important C, the conservation C. Obviously, just mentioned for the conflict, but also in general, this is really the serious issue. If sites are not preserved, the main purpose of the convention is not fulfilled. Conserving sites, conserving the authenticity, the integrity of sites, has become an even more complex task. In recent years, we have a number of threats that have multiplied that are not linked to conflict. This I spoke already. They're linked to processes of globalization or like mass tourism, pressures for construction, real estate, the mining operations that we see in Africa, a process, an effect of this globalization of the economy, climate impacts, and so on. And all these represent really the future challenges, the future dimension for any conservation effort. And I don't think we have yet measured the full implication of these processes on the future of the convention. Now, as you know, the committee has instituted a document which somehow summarizes every year the reasons why sites are threatened, but I don't think they have yet looked into the future. And these trends that I mentioned, let's call it globalization trends, are long-term processes. So we need absolutely to make an assessment of the future threats that are linked to the changing conditions of economic, social structures in the world. So obviously, when the sites are not preserved, we fail. Convention fails. You have no idea how many critics we receive. Sometimes openly, sometimes less openly, for not being able to maintain the authenticity of sites, of their environment, the surrounding environment, and the social fabric. And of course, this is very frustrating for all those who work, every day on the convention and its management, because we know that the responsibility for the management and the conservation of a site is essentially of the state party and the local community, whereas UNESCO is the one that is, taken into responsible for this. So we need to reflect really deeply on the issue of conservation, as it is really the pillar for the credibility of the convention, and determines what are also the limits of the changes that are acceptable. This is an old discussion, and we never came to any clear understanding. What is the flexibility that we can accept to adjust to social, technical, economic changes that affect and will affect in the future the convention? And Therese mentioned that I come from Venice, which is really an icon of World Heritage. And I live in an historic city that has currently 25 million tourists a year. It's a lot of people. Huh? In fact, I counted them. They are on average 70,000 per day, average. Population is 58,000. So you see, and I keep saying that this is not anymore a tourist historic city, it's a thematic park inhabited. It's very, very hard to, but it is true. And you can imagine also the impact and consequences on the social fabric, on the prices, real estate, and so on, of this enormous phenomenon. Now, which is, of course, has its positive side. I'm not saying that it's all negative. For instance, it brings a lot of wealth and a lot of people, which is interesting and so on. But there is a moment in which this becomes a damaging factor and not a positive factor. And I've seen many communities, in fact, more fragile than Venice now, that have succumbed to this. I think it's an extreme example of what can happen for for instance, with mass tourism, which I think is, if you look at the future, is certainly the thing that we can best predict. The UN WTO, the World Tourism Organization, makes studies on this. In 2012, we reached the 1 billion international tourism. 1 billion people moved internationally for tourism. But their estimate is that by 2030, which is tomorrow, this will be 2 billions. Because of Asia, because of China, because of India, because of welfare, because of people want to move, and there is an increasing mass of people that have the resources to do it, able to do it. So mass tourism is the number one issue that we can at least address, study, predict, calculate, manage, try to do something. If we don't do it, then situations like the ones I described in Venice will multiply. And by the way, my calculation is that this will be 50 million for Venice. And I don't know how my city can ever resist these changes. There will be a major problem there. So we need to do a lot of, to understand the future. It's a dimension that is always difficult to grasp, and very often we avoid, looking into this because it's difficult. Or maybe we just limit our future to the next few years instead of looking at longer term. But if we don't do it, we cannot preserve the authenticity and integrity of sites that are under pressure. And I think this is the real challenge of the Convention. The Convention is really this tool that the international community gave itself for the long-term conservation of sites. We don't do conservation for 1 or 2 years. It's a long-term operation, so everything should always be projected in the long term. So credibility is at stake unless we understand how to strengthen international conservation practices, how to strengthen institutions, how to manage the issue of finances, which has become a very serious problem for many, many communities. Well, I hope that these points do not sound too pessimistic, because there are areas of the Convention which are, in fact, I think where some good results have been achieved in the past decades. And one of them that I would like to mention is the capacity building effort, which is one of the C's, by the way. I think that today it's much easier than in the past to find training programs on heritage conservation at different levels in many countries in the world. The world of the Convention is now surrounded by universities, training centers, institutions, programs. I think that the network that exists today of trainers, people that are part of a training process or have been part of a training process, is quite substantial. So it's a good result that I see in the area that have been promoted by the Convention. But obviously it's a constant effort is also needed to maintain the good qualitative and quantitative offer. But let's say that at least some results were generated by the initiatives that UNESCO took. For instance, some of the so-called Category 2 centers that exist. Some have been the initiatives of governments and institutions. Some, like the Cottbus, is a university, and there are many like this. And we hope even more in the future, so that students, young students, can find their training process, but also existing managers and so on can find ways of being updated and trained on things that are needed for their work. We have now a large community. I think Marie-Thérèse knows that there is in the world a large community of people that have been trained in heritage. And when I go around the world, I find a lot of people that tell me, I've done this course. And this is a very important resource for the future. In fact, we should be able to perhaps make this community even more compact, more interchanging, so that we use it as a resource for the future. Some progresses also in the area of communication and exchange. I think the UNESCO has done some work, at least in terms of institutional communication. I think it's pretty good. Site is very, very open, very rich, transparent, and so on. The World Heritage is accepted to be exposed to public scrutiny and so on. But there are other forms of communication that I think require more work. Clearly, the one directed to the public, because at the moment, although it's pretty big, the information on World Heritage is pretty big, it's one-sided, because the media only look at the glamour part of World Heritage, and very often they don't look at the hard work that is needed, because it's makes less news, right? We have to somehow, try to educate, so to say, the media, so that they are aware that that there are difficulties in the management of a site. Is an extremely complicated task in terms of technical, financial, etc., etc., and this has to be exposed to the public. By the way, if we educate the media, so I use the term, and they can then pass this message to the people, I think this is the only way also to reach the politicians, because they listen to that. When they stay in the room, they listen to that. Okay, let me close my remarks with some short discussion on a dimension that I consider of the utmost importance, which is the contribution of the Convention to local development, to development in general. You see that the 5 Cs, the 5th C adopted in 2007, finally introduced this approach in the Convention, although the 5th C is a very, very shy, a very shy way of looking at development. They talk about community involvement, and then, of course, the Convention talks about benefiting the communities. It's kind of a top-down, view on a community. A community should not be benefited by the Convention. It should be the actor of its own development. So I think there is some work that needs to be done in the paradigms that surround the Convention. But certainly, at least we have broken that wall. And I can assure you that it was not easy to put that term, development, in the Convention. There were a lot of resistance. There was a lot of resistance among many members of the Convention, of the committee, because it's something that associating conservation and development was seen as a difficult thing. At the same time, my point was that the Convention is not a product of an NGO or it is United Nations. It is a treaty, so it has to somehow follow the main mission of the United Nations. It cannot be considered a separate one. Now, in the past few years, as you know, UNESCO has developed a very big campaign for considering culture a part of the international development process, looking for this famous post-2015 agenda, which will be approved at the end of the year. So a lot of changes have come about, and now the sustainable development process is something that is seen as something that looks like what the 5th C should do. And this is why we have had the 40th anniversary, a very interesting year of reflection on this, and this is why we have also in the committee this year and in the coming years, certainly there will be a greater reflection of this issue. We hope, although we don't know exactly, we hope that at the end of the year there will be some reference to heritage and culture in the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, the new set of goals that the UN will approve. I've been part of this campaign for many years. I can tell you it's a very, very frustrating one, because you have to struggle and fight for words and so on, and sometimes then your word is swept away, and then you have to fight again to bring it back, and so it's a gigantic Sisyphic effort for a word. But this word is important because, first of all, it represents a political statement by the superior body of the UN, but also because it's a message to the member states. that culture is really an important dimension of development, that heritage is an important area that can actually create not only economic development, but most of it social and human development. And I think that the convention is slowly understanding this possible role, and it's getting closer to what the UNESCO has promoted in the past year. So I'm sure that all these issues that I'm raising will be at the core of the discussion of this workshop. I'm very happy to be part of it, and I really would like to congratulate the organizers for your initiative. Thank you very much.